Good afternoon, everyone. It's Kirsten here for another episode of Spa Business Break here on Kirsten Foss Coaching. So there has been lots and lots of discussion about staff policies and in particular staff handbooks in a lot of Facebook groups for spa owners. And so I wanted to bring up a piece of this conversation, and that has to do with your own leadership and the agreements that you make, and how this dovetails with your staff handbook, which is all your spa policies, right? So your staff handbook is all of the policies that are between the relationship between you and your staff. So this is everything. This can be should have your vision statement or your company culture statement or your values. It should have kind of the general information about like what hours the spa is open, that kind of thing. But it's also going to have policies in there about what you expect of them, their behavior at work. You're going to be having like downtime duties in there. There's your staff handbook is all of the behavioral things that you want to have happen in the spa. So when it comes to staff handbook, sometimes a lot of owners think that, especially if they don't have a staff handbook, they're like, my staff are driving me crazy. Things are inconsistent. I need a policy handbook, and everything will be just fine. Let me just swipe my thing. Everything is just going to be fine. Everything will get worked out. I won't have any more fires to put out. But I also see spas having staff handbooks, but they're not using them properly or at all. And so what I mean by that is you can't just buy a handbook and then say to your staff, you need to read this. This is how it's going to be around here. These are all our policies now. And then not have anything after that. Your staff handbook is an agreement. It's an agreement. You're saying, this is how I want the spa to be run. This is how I want behaviors to be. This is how our guest experience will be. And so it's an agreement, and you're going to be having them sign something at the end that they've read this. So it's an agreement between you and them. But what I want to really kind of point out right now today about that is that sometimes owners are really dropping the ball after they've got a staff handbook in place, and they're not referring back to it when they see staff not doing what they want. And so it's not enough that you just buy a handbook and have your staff read it and sign it, and then everything should be perfect after that, or should be smooth sailing. You as the owner have a leadership responsibility to toe the line, towing your own line. So if you've got policies in there, are you honoring your own agreement and following those policies? Or are you getting sloppy and having a bit of a do as I say, not as I do moment with your team? Because they watch you do stuff. And if you're doing things not according to policy, they're going to be wondering, maybe do I have to do things according to policy? And that's where you start seeing things slip. So that's why as a leader, when it comes to honoring agreements, we need to be stepping up a lot better in some things. So where are the places that you feel like you've told your staff that you want them, what you want them to do, or how you want them to behave, or whatever you're telling them, whatever your expectations are? And are there places where you are not doing the same for yourself, for your own professionalism in your spa? So that is one piece of this conversation. Are you honoring the agreements that you agreed to? And if you're not, time to pull up your socks, get your act together, because people are watching you, you're the leader, and you need to be, if you want other people to honor their agreements in your business, you need to honor your own. The other piece about not honoring agreements is that if you're not holding your team accountable to your policies, then that also says a lot. It says that you've got the policies, but you're not willing to do anything about them to keep them active. So where are you dropping the ball on? Maybe there's team members that are going against policy, maybe ever so slightly or ever so slowly. They're just getting farther and farther away, and you haven't said anything to them because you have to have a difficult conversation. So that is a lot of times where that first not honoring agreements comes up, is because we get this constriction inside about, oh my gosh, I have to have this awkward, difficult conversation. I don't want to deal with this, so I'm just going to kind of look away for now. That's not going to help you at all. And the other piece about that is, in a staff handbook, you absolutely need to have a disciplinary policy. And if you're not following your own policies and holding your team accountable to those policies, you're essentially saying that you don't need to adhere to these policies. There has been legal action with employees that have been fired. They've been able to go back and say, basically, their legal team has been able to prove that the owner, by virtue of not activating the disciplinary policy, was saying that this poor behavior is okay, because she didn't activate the disciplinary policy. So when you're not holding your team or even clients accountable for your policies, then you can't really go back and get upset about it. You either hold them to policies or you don't. You activate your disciplinary policy, or why bother even having a staff handbook? I know it's difficult. It's just part of being a leader, is that we need to step up, have those difficult conversations, and honor our own agreements. Now, this conversation about agreements, and you may be kind of thinking, this sounds a little bit familiar. This conversation about agreements came up in a completely different conversation, more of a kind of a personal, spiritual conversation this morning on Facebook, but it reminded me of this topic that we need to talk about in the spa industry. So this online friend of mine, she was talking about the book, The 4 Agreements. So it's going to be backwards on a Facebook Live, but if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about honoring your agreements. So this book is by Don Miguel Ruiz, and it's called a wisdom book called The 4 Agreements. And in my opinion, I think every spa owner, every entrepreneur should be reading this book. And I'll just give you the 4 agreements that he's writing about. So the first one is be impeccable with your word. And this is what we were talking about today on today's Facebook Live. Your word, in this case, we're talking about your spa policies. Your word has actually been documented on a piece of paper. You have a staff member that signed it. So that's a big deal. It's an agreement. So what he says here is speak with integrity, say only what you mean, avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others. Use the power of your word in direction of truth and love. Now, I like that last sentence because that works so well in the spa industry. We don't have to get all woo-woo or spiritual about it, but when we use the power of our words in the direction of truth, which is your spa policies, that's the truth of your business. It is how you have decided to design how your spa is going to run, flow, how the people are going to work in there. That is your truth. That is your promise. And it's about love, because we're in the business, we're in the personal service industry. We got a lot of heart. We don't get into this industry unless we absolutely love it. So when we're talking about honoring agreements with truth and love, I think sometimes we just need to dial back into why we got into doing this and what is that core reason for why we're doing what we're doing. And when we can tap into that, then it's sometimes easier for us to be more impeccable with our word. So anyways, today was food for thought for you. Maybe you have been slacking off on your own agreements that you've made with yourself. I sometimes find that hard too. I used to actually have these 4 agreements. The first one was to be impeccable with your word. The second one, don't take anything personally. Third one is don't make assumptions. And the fourth one is always do your best. And I actually had those written on a whiteboard in my office for quite a long time. And for me, it was about being impeccable about my word to myself, because there's lots of things that I said, oh, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this. And then there's plenty of times where I procrastinated, or I was like, eh. So I wasn't impeccable with my word. But I know that I'm very aware about how I'm behaving when it comes to making promises to myself. It's a lot easier to make promises to other people and to be impeccable to our word with other people, but we're human, and when we get the human condition involved into policies and business, sometimes it just gets a little messy. So that means that we as leaders just need to be more aware of ourselves and how we're thinking, how we're behaving, and what that looks like as a result in our business. So sometimes we just need a little kick in the pants. So if you've been finding that maybe you haven't been as impeccable to your word, to yourself, to your team, maybe to your clients, maybe it's time to do a little house cleaning there. All right, thanks for joining me for today's spa business break. I will be back here next Thursday at 12 noon Pacific. Thanks for joining me.